So we will be discussing the invention of heterosexuality in the late 19th and early 20th century. And as I say this, you're probably thinking, what do I mean by the invention of heterosexuality? People have been engaging in what we would regard as heterosexual behavior, well, from the very beginning of people. But the concept of heterosexuality, the way that we understand it today, that does have a history. And that's what we're going to be looking at in this lecture. In the 19th century, the way of thinking about sex was, first of all, that the goal ultimately was sex within marriage for procreation. That was ultimately what sex was supposed to be. Things like masturbation, which used up your vital essences and your energy and distracted you from important things like work and sports and athletics and sex with your wife, was bad. Sodomy was bad. Fornication with people when you weren't married yet was bad. All of these things were bad, but the ultimate goal was sex within marriage for procreation. And there was this assumption of these ideals of true manhood and true womanhood, the true Christian man and the true Christian woman was the ideal that people looked up to, a pure woman and a civilized man who had the aggressiveness to pursue the goals of manhood. By the late 19th century, we start having people who are talking about sex and thinking about sex and sharing their ideas. And their ideas have a real impact on the way people think about sex. So you have Havelock Ellis, who was English, and Ellis argues about the importance of sexual passion and the essentialness of looking up to, responding to, respecting the need for sexual passion in people's lives. He also is one of the people who writes about what he calls sexual inversion, or what we might call homosexuality, and sees that as a part of sexual expression of people rather than being a sinful act. He regards it as sort of part of the variation of human sexuality. We have Sigmund Freud, and Sigmund Freud had a lot of complicated ideas. Americans early in the 20th century really didn't understand Freud very well for the most part. The idea they pulled from him was that at the base of human there was this powerful sexual drive, the id, and that shaped human beings and needed to be expressed. And finally, William J. Robinson, who was an American writer, physician, and he once again argued for the importance of human passion and sexuality. So these are all thinkers who are paid attention to, who are saying, look, we have to seriously look at sex. And more than that, we need to get rid of this old idea of thinking of sex, which was focused on control of sex, limiting sex, restricting sex. And we need to move away from that and look at human passion, sexual passion, as a critical element of life. What develops is a new way of thinking about sexual acts. And so the older way of thinking about it was that there was a good kind of sex and then there were all these other kinds of sex. And all those other kinds of sex, whether it was masturbation or sodomy or premarital sex or adultery, all of those were bad. They were things you should not do, but they were bad acts. And they were tended to see as just human beings do bad, sinful things. And some of those bad, sinful things are these different acts. Well, instead, what people are starting to say is, well, wait a minute. Maybe people who commit sodomy, maybe women who express desire for other women, maybe they're fundamentally something different. That it's not just the fact that they have committed these individual sins, but that instead they have a different nature, a different identity. And so it's sort of this moving away from thinking about the acts that somebody commits to the identity that they have, which is of homosexuality or being queer. And then the same kind of thing happens with heterosexuality, going away from this idea of somebody who commits legal, rightful sexual acts to this idea of being an active heterosexual, something that is very different from a homosexual. Part of what is driving this is in European cities and certain American cities, the large ones, you're seeing the development of queer urban communities. One of the best documented is New York City and Gay Men, Gay New York by Chauncey is sort of one of the first histories that's done. But you also have Harlem, and we have, particularly through interviews that were done, oral history interviews that were done with Mabel Hampton, who was a woman who talked about her experiences as a young woman who later identified as a lesbian in the 1920s in Harlem. So we know about these queer communities that existed, and some of them started gaining more attention in these years. Gladys Bentley, the woman in this photograph, was a very well-known performer in Harlem in the 1920s who dressed in masculine clothes and sang about love with women and gay men and a whole variety of topics. She was known for being fairly obscene in her nightclub act. But so this sort of growing visibility of people who seem to be different. What emerges is this new idea that to be normal is to be heterosexual. And being heterosexual means that you are a healthy person, that you are a civilized person, and we particularly see this expressed in the 1920s as the word becomes more popular and known. And more than that, it's a matter that you have to present yourself as heterosexual. You need to be visibly heterosexual. And so certain things that might have been considered maybe a bit odd, but not necessarily something to worry about, like living with your best friend who happens to be of the same sex as you, or physical intimacy with your friends who are of the same sex as you, or engaging in certain kinds of activities. It becomes an issue where earlier on women's sports in the early 20th century becomes a big deal. One of the big ones is women's basketball, others. But by the 1940s, you're getting advice and colleges are giving advice to young women that that's not a great idea. Instead, what they should focus on is sports that they can do with their partner, with their boyfriend, right? Like tennis or golf, rather than sports that they do with a team of women. Not everybody goes along with this. These women's sports continue to exist, but they're given an increasing side eye as being possibly connected to being. So there's this new obligation to appear as a heterosexual. Part of this also is it's a time period with an increasing focus on pleasure. The American economy is really shifting from a production economy to where the focus is on producing goods to a consumption economy. The idea is that part of what makes the economy function is that people are buying things, and that's increasingly seen as an important thing. And people are encouraged to enjoy consuming goods like this automobile, like makeup, like clothes, like radios. And another source of pleasure is seen as sexual pleasure. And a lot of the commodities that people are buying are often linked to that, such as the explosion of interest in makeup, the new styles of clothes, movies, which are very much designed to be titillating, and so forth. This is expressed in the peer culture of young people with a new focus on dating instead of courtship. So courtship is something you do under the supervision of your family, particularly your parents. You meet in the parlor. You spend time at home with your family around you. Dating, you go out and do. And of course, once you have cars, that makes it even easier for young people to go out and spend time together in public areas often, rather than under the supervision of their families. And also, there's a growing acceptability of petting, basically fondling physical intimacy that's not sex. And that can be done with more than just the person who is directly courting you. One of the things in the 1920s that shows that you're popular, that people should look up to you, is that you date lots of men. And so instead of having all this focus on a single courtship, there's much more of a focus on demonstrating your attractiveness by dating lots of men and engaging in a level of physical intimacy that before wouldn't have seen as acceptable. The end goal, of course, is still marriage for most people. And there is always the danger that if your physical explorations go too far and you get pregnant or the man doesn't marry you, you have trouble. And a new sort of concept of what marriage should be, focusing much more on partnership, a partnership between equals, that what really matters is mutual love and friendship between the two. And so we're moving away from this 19th century idea that men and women are so fundamentally different to an idea that they can be friends, that they can share love and mutual interests. And more than that, that a critically important part of this companionate marriage is sexual passion between the two. And that is supposed to be a mutual sexual passion, not just the wife having sex because it's a nice thing to do for her husband, but both the wife and the husband feeling sexually passionate together. So a bunch of changes have been in this lecture. Sort of the switch from acts like sodomy to identities like homosexuality. The reality, there's a growing number of queer communities that show up in cities where people begin to spot them and notice them. This focus on heterosexuality as the new normal and what you actively have to demonstrate. And of course, peer pleasure and companionate marriage. And for some sources, places to look at, Stephanie Kuntz's Marriage, a History, D'Amelio and Friedman, Intimate Matters, A History of Sexuality in America, and of course, Fierce Desires by Rebecca Davis, both two good overviews. Paula Fass's The Damned and the Beautiful, American Youth in the 1920s. Yes, it's a classic, but I still love it. And The First Sexual Revolution, The Emergence of Male Heterosexuality in Modern America, Kevin White.